the economy, and something that was always a matter of when, not an if, but a when. Today, the when is right now. Donald Trump, having wrapped his administration's tentacles around the throats of other independent agencies, appears now to be targeting the Federal Reserve and its leader, Jerome Powell, perhaps in an effort to blame someone, anyone, for what he himself has done to the economy. Donald Trump now says the Fed chair's, quote, termination cannot come fast enough, end quote. Remember, yesterday, we started this hour by telling you about Powell, who was very clear about our financial circumstances, saying that the chaos and confusion created by Donald Trump's tariffs make it hard to balance two vital things, controlling inflation and boosting economic growth. Trump, apparently, so angered by those two simple truths and the fact that the central bank decided not to cut rates, went after Powell on social media. But here's the thing. Removing Powell from his position is not Trump's decision to make. From the New York Times reporting on this, quote, many legal experts agree that the president probably does not have the authority to fire the Fed chair over a policy disagreement, although it has not been tested in court. Yesterday, in his speech, Powell reflected on exactly what we're talking about. Watch that.
We're never going to be influenced by any political pressure. People can say whatever they want. That's fine. That's not a problem. But we will do what we do strictly without consideration of political or any other extraneous factors.
Except that spontaneous round of applause. Now, the economic and political backdrop for this brewing standoff is found in some brand new data from our colleagues over at CNBC. That data suggests that Donald Trump is registering the worst economic approval ratings of his entire presidential career. Not only is his approval for his handling of the economy underwater right now by 12 points, Americans disapprove of his across-the-board tariffs by a 49 to 35% margin. Majorities of Americans believe tariffs are bad for American workers, for inflation, and the health of the overall economy. This is where we start again today with CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman. Steve, I feel like we had maybe one of our earliest conversations around this tension and Jerome Powell's stoic posture in the face of it. That seems very real. What can you tell us?
Well, look, if every American does not understand why in 1913 and several times amended, Congress set up a Federal Reserve to be independent from the presidency, well, then this should be the greatest and easiest constitutional lesson you've ever seen. Why? Because here is a president angry that the Fed did not lower interest rates, threatening or talking about removing the Federal Reserve chair. That is exactly why you have an independent Federal Reserve, so that the president does not get that say, because almost every president, although this president more publicly and more vociferously than almost any other president in the history of the nation, is more insistent upon what the Fed should do. And that's okay. That is obviously within his rights to say that. But then the threatening of the termination, and obviously, Nicole, I'm sure you know about a Wall Street Journal story by my colleague Nick Timrose from the Wall Street Journal, who said there has been significant discussions in the background at Mar-a-Lago about removing Powell, which people have resisted, people around him have resisted. We also were told by the White House today that there are no imminent plans to remove Fed Chair Jay Powell, and that Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has tried to counsel the president that that would be destabilizing to markets.
Let me do two things with you, Steve. I mean, the creation of something that is independent and then Trump's willingness to topple it is a story that I've come in the air and told over and over and over again. I think it started with the three branches falling apart when the Republicans decided to stop acting like a separate branch of government. But I just want to show our viewers how this collision is taking shape, that Powell and Trump are saying two very different things. Let me play that sound.
Oh, he'll leave. If I ask him to, he'll be out of there. But I don't think he's doing the job. He's too late, always too late, a little slow, and I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
I guess the other question is, to follow up on Victoria's question, do you believe that the president has the power to fire or demote you, and has the Fed determined the legality of a president demoting at will any of the other governors with leadership positions?
Not permitted under the law.
Not what?
Not permitted under the law.
I mean, I just want to press you, Steve. I mean, we are now relying on the courts almost completely and entirely. Is that the position that Powell finds himself in? He doesn't expect the Senate to lay his body down on the tracks or the Congress?
Yeah, so a couple things. I believe if Jay Powell were fired by the president, he would have to defend himself privately. And I believe he has positioned himself in that way to prepare for that should it happen, is my understanding. The other thing is there is a technicality by which the president can fire a Fed chair or a governor, and that is for malfeasance. I just want to be technically correct about that. But it is not believed that a disagreement about interest rate policy would be that kind of malfeasance that might justify a firing. I think what we're talking about here, just to be clear, is how the Fed chair, is reacting to the president's tariff policy. We've talked about this several times. There are two very conflicting momentums that are created in the economy, one towards weaker growth, which might prompt the Fed to lower interest rates, one towards higher inflation, which might prompt the Fed to raise interest rates. The problem here is that the process is very unclear. It's rather chaotic. It's dependent upon multiple negotiations over a 90-day period. So the Fed doesn't even know what the tariffs will be, cannot gauge the inflationary impact, and does not want to give up the hard-won progress over several years where, remember, under Biden, there's some suggestion that somehow Powell was kind to Biden. Well, guess what? He raised the interest rate to 5.3%, one of the highest we had seen in decades, in order to try to vanquish inflation. So the Fed does not wish to go through that again. I believe they are correct in assuming the American public does not want to go through inflation again. So what Powell is saying, and what really has caught everybody's ear, is I'm going to take care of inflation. If I have an economic growth problem, which I don't right now because unemployment is low, growth is relatively high, in fact, above what we believe to be the potential growth of the economy, and it's been a pretty good economy. I don't have that problem, but I did have an inflation problem. I still sort of have an inflation problem. I'm going to address that, and apparently the president does not like that.
It is just another historic and dramatic clash playing out in public view. You've got the juiciest beat on the planet. Steve Liesman, thank you for starting us off.
I can just tell you, Nicole,
please.
It's never good news when the news about the Fed comes from the White House. That is, over a 30-year career, I've never had a good time when that's happened.
Well, say more. I mean, what does that do? What does that do to business leaders and to employers and to the economy in general?
Okay, it's very easy. Put yourself in the position here. If Powell were fired, that's conditional future tense for all those grammarians out there, right? If Powell were fired, the next person comes in. What does the market believe that next move by that new chair will be? One based on their sincere judgment and evaluation of the economy, or one based entirely on politics? What you can do, if you just want to have fun, is go look at the Turkish lira. The Turkish lira has depreciated severely over time when their President Erdogan went in and meddled with the central bank's independence. The general view of many studies that have been done over several decades is that an independent Federal Reserve gives you lower interest rates, a stronger currency, and better monetary policy, that politicians just ain't very good at it, and it should be left to an independent Federal Reserve. If you were to fire that person, then a lot of the structure and the trust upon which American markets depend would be withered away or eroded away.